Chapter 801, Plea. After a brief moment of stupefaction, Emlyn couldn't help but look around. He suspected that the world was lurking around him, as though he was one of the nearby believers. After all, he had never mentioned the mental terror candle at the tarot club. Bishop Otravsky seldom had conflicts with others, so he almost never used any mystical items. If it wasn't because Emlyn had been planted with a psychological cue to frequently head to the Harvest Church and receive the heads-up from Sherlock Moriarty, he wouldn't have asked the bishop and learned of the existence of the mental terror candle. At that instant, everyone looked like the world to Emlyn. Be it the plump middle-aged man, the granny with a gray headscarf, or the fashionable beauty, he felt that all of them looked like they had something similar to the world. No, I must figure it out. He's actually so aware of my surroundings. I haven't mentioned certain things even while in front of Mr. Fool. Emlyn was left in utter shock as he stood up and walked to the clergyman's break room at the back. In a quiet and empty environment, he replied, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to directly communicate with the world." In less than 10 seconds, Emlyn saw a dark red glow surge forward like a tidal wave and devour him. Then he found himself back above the gray fog. He was inside the majestic palace and was seated at his seat. And at the other end of the mottled table was the blurry figure of the world who was waiting for him. Compared to before, Emlyn had changed tremendously. He wasn't in a rush to speak to the world, and he instead bowed to Mr. Fool, who was leisurely watching at the other end of the table, before looking at his target. "How did you know that I can get the mental terror candle?" Under Klein's control, the world said with a hoarse laugh, "We might have met before." He didn't speak further and only mentioned the key point. As for whether Emlyn could figure out the situation, that wasn't his problem. Of course, Klein believed that Emlyn lacked the ability to connect the world to Sherlock Moriarty, since he lacked the necessary clues. Emlyn frowned bit by bit as he had a few targets of suspicion, but he wasn't able to determine who was the world. "Believe me, I have no ill intentions towards the members of the Tarot Club," the world added when he saw Emlyn in a state of prolonged silence. "Heth, there will be a day when I'll find you." Emlyn silently muttered to himself as he asked, "What are you going to do with the mental terror candle? I need to have a substantial reason to borrow such a mystical item." Klein controlled his urge to rub his temples as he made the world turn solemn and say, "To treat my psychological problems." Treat psychological problems. Emlyn couldn't help but shrink his body back before straightening it again. Looking back at the world, his eyes clearly indicated that the world really was a dangerous lunatic. The mental terror candle does have such effects. Emlyn thought for a moment and said, "I can only borrow it for half a day. There wouldn't be any problems, right?" Klein held back the horror and pleas that were running through his mind as he controlled the world to answer, "No problem." If the mental terror candle was effective, Klein could finish the problem in 15 minutes. If it wasn't of any use, it would be the same even if he possessed it for days or months. Therefore, the rental duration wasn't critical. He didn't mind such restrictions at all. Emlyn did a count and said, "The rental fee will cost £300, as well as 5 pages of Beyonder powers in Leymano's travels." He decided to outsource half of the debt he had. 5 pages? How many pages did this fellow use? As Klein lampooned, he made the world reply, "That wouldn't be an issue." After closing the deal, Emlyn immediately returned to the real world and walked into the Harvest Church's break room for the clergymen. Casting his gaze to the side of the altar and waiting for Bishop Otravsky to finish talking to the believers, Emlyn suddenly fell into a dilemma. Although he sounded confident in front of the world, he had never tried borrowing similar items from the bishop. He had no idea what kind of attitude the bishop would have. As his gaze darted around, Emlyn subconsciously surveyed the tiny prayer hall. "I've helped Father rescue many commoners who were infected by the plague and have been teaching those who wish to learn about herbs. I've made the faith of Earth Mother spread quite significantly in this borough. What's wrong with borrowing the mental terror candle for half a day?" Emlyn raised his chin and walked to Bishop Otravsky, who he needed to look up at, and cleared his throat. "I have a friend that has a psychological problem. I wish to borrow the mental terror candle." He didn't directly mention his contributions, because his pride didn't permit him to do so. Otravsky looked down at the pre-strobed Imlin and smiled warmly. Okay. That's it. Emlyn was stunned, finding it unbelievable that the bishop would agree so easily. He didn't immediately accept it, as he couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you afraid that I'll lose the candle?" Otravsky replied with a smile, "Everyone and every item has its end. They will all return to the earth, buried deep within the soil and sprout, grow, and bloom, one incarnation after another. That is the fate of all entities. If the mental terror candle is lost, it just means that my connection with it has come to an end. I will need to patiently await the arrangements that fate and Mother have for me. Whether the mental terror candle is lost depends on fate, but whether I end up being killed by you is also fate." Emlyn lampooned without asking further. He received the strange candle from the half-giant bishop. Following that, he used the excuse of needing to treat his friend to leave the Harvest Church. He randomly found an inn and set up the sacrificial ritual. Above the gray fog, Klein once again received the mental terror candle. More than half of the mystical item was burnt, and its surface was covered with what looked like human skin. There were a few warts that protruded out. The candle's wick was very short and was entirely black in color. It was covered in thin, densely packed scale-like patterns. Klein didn't delay, for he didn't wish to give his alternate personality a chance to grow. He wanted to resolve the problem completely while it was still weak. Otherwise, what awaited him was the irreversible fate of losing control. Furthermore, the mysterious space above the gray fog would completely screen the negative effects of the combat between the two personalities. Phew! Klein slowly exhaled as he extended his hand to summon the sea god scepter. At that moment, he didn't do any divination because he couldn't be sure who me referred to. The outcome would naturally be meaningless. Puh! Klein snapped his fingers and lit the mental terror candle. Above the pitch-black wick, a flame with light blue spirituality silently glowed, illuminating the palace that looked like a giant's residence. Unknowingly, the environment changed as a cupboard, desk, bunk bed, and gas meter appeared in Klein's eyes. The crimson moonlight shone in from outside the windows, covering every item with a crimson veil layer. This was the apartment where the Morettis had lived in. This was the place where Klein Moretti had shot himself to death. At that moment, a figure was sitting at the bottom bunk, looking at the sea god scepter-wielding Klein with a warped expression. He had traits like black hair, brown eyes, thin-built, average-looking features, a rather deep outline, and a scholarly air to him. He was another Klein. This Klein revealed a furious expression as he said, "You occupied my body, and now you wish for my soul to be obliterated. I should be Klein Moretti, you despicable, shameless transmigrator, you parasite." He appeared to have just grown in strength, and he wasn't able to use the objects in the external world. Klein didn't reply as he walked over with a heavy expression. The expression of Klein slowly changed as fear occupied his eyes. His body scrunched up as he pleaded with a slight tremble, "Let me go, let me go. You snatched my brother, my sister, and my life from me. Isn't that enough? I'll remain quietly in your body, helping you analyze problems and giving you suggestions. I'll definitely not wrestle control with you over the body. Let me go, let me go." Klein remained silent as he raised his sea god, scepter-wielding right hand. The Klein was already awash with tears as he yelled angrily and fearfully, "I only wanted to remind you. If I wasn't trying to remind you, why would I have exposed myself? Let me go, let me go. I have no ill intentions." Klein silently looked at him and made the blue gems on the tip of the sea god scepter light up one after another. Lightning bolts instantly appeared as they twisted and entangled Klein, like a storm. Amidst shrill cries, the figure rapidly dissipated as a bolt of lightning wiped all traces of it. As expected of myself, to know the soft spots in my heart and which are the most effective ways to plea. However, I've already come to know who I am. I'm Joe Mingrui, who is fused with Klein's memories and emotions. If I were to let you go, it would be equivalent to splitting the two up, admitting that they are opposing parties. That way, I'll immediately lose control once I return to the real world. Klein lowered the scepter and closed his eyes as he sighed silently. Then, he ultimately maintained his lucidity as he left the mind world.